Good day. My name is irrelevant. Graham, if you like. I'm just another anonymous person on this human zoo on planet Earth. I want to explain to people, if they give a damn, how the West is defeating itself on behalf and for Islam, and how its politicians are aiding and abetting Islam whilst pretending to be against it on one side, and of course the left is all for it for some reason. But there's a reason for why they're all for it. The left is basically captured quite some time ago by Islamic forces through one way or another, and behind the scenes somewhere, who knows. But the point is this, that ever since Ayatollah Khomeini explained what his plans were to defeat the West, I listened very, very carefully to what he said, and listened to what he said, and considering the art of strategy which he was familiar with, then how would I go about defeating the West if I was a Muslim? So therefore I get sort of insight into what they were doing, and I basically wasn't difficult to predict how they would do it. And now they did it. He said he was going to flood the West with people, grow up the population of Islam, and then spread them into the West. Well, that's been done. And also, what else do? You defeat the West, defeat it spiritually, by replacing the spiritual component in society, which held it together, by swapping that or removing that and replacing it with a purely materialistic deity, if you like, the cash cow, the FPOS machine, the handout mentality that is now destroying the West. And that's the corporate system right down to the people on the dole and everywhere. It's not just the people on the dole who want the handout, it's the corporate socialists want the handout from the government as well. But what happened was, really, because in Australia, which I can only speak about because I live here, the Liberal Party and Labour Party become corporate entities. So they gated representing the people, and they more or less represent merely the financial forces within the world, the cartels and the bankers, and they can no longer represent the people, and therefore, because they're contracted to those people, so therefore they've got to come up with strategies that look like they're representing the people or beneficial to the people, but in actual fact defeating the country's purpose. In other words, the Liberal Party in Australia and Labour Party are into defeating the country's purpose while pretending all time that they're for it. They're contradicting themselves in the mathematics of it. Over time it contradicts what they're really saying, in the fact that the Liberal Party in particular was involved in a thing called negative gearing, and I suppose the Labour Party was involved in this, and that meant that they inflated the price of housing with the idea you were going to get rich when you'll retire, and wealthier by making the houses more and more expensive. And all that did was means that the amount required to run society had to be inflated. Though a lot more money had to be borrowed, either through credit cards or through government debt and everything, to pay for doctors and nurses and police and schools and hospitals and all the basic infrastructure society cannot exist without. Civilized society cannot exist without in a modern system that the West is famous for. It cannot exist without this. But the government's inflated, or people, government, if you like, con the people, or the people got the people to con themselves into thinking to get richer and richer and richer by inflating the value of houses, now to the point where very fewer and fewer people can afford them, and the younger generation can hardly afford them at all, and have been left off the housing system, if you like, and now have been defeated by their grandparents or their parents, if you like. The young parents have been defeated. So that way, the Western society, in that aspect alone, has started to defeat its own self on behalf of Islam. Now, the other part of this is what's so-called the left, or the pseudo-left, or the Labour Party. They basically are prisoners or captives of Islamist Marxists, and the biggest problem with Islam at the moment is the fight between Marxist Islamists and sort of super capitalist Marxist, Islamists, sorry. And this is a thing people seem to miss because the papers don't want to report it. But the thing is, what the Labour have done is basically set out using PC to undermine the democratic free system, if you like, by proscribed codex, which tells you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't question authority, they the authority, whoever their politicians are the supreme authority over society, you can't argue with them. So therefore they're subverting the actual intellect, what should run society and progress it in a practical and pragmatic manner, and they're negating that. At the same time, they use a fear, a fabricated fear of climate change, which is pure fabrication, because if no one ever mentioned climate change, well, no one would have any fear of it. We just get on with our lives as normal, especially in Australia, and deal with the climate as we have done forever here. It's drought, floods, whatever. Just deal with the climate and adapt to it according to the intelligence we have within us, which is intrinsic, and says, well, the smart people adapt to the climate, adapt them systems and their economic systems, the way they farm and etc., according to the needs of the people and the economy. Well, we've done the opposite to that. The Labour Party and the left, and including the Liberals have joined in with this because they were infiltrated by a man called Turnbull, who was an infiltrator for the far left. He infiltrated the Liberal Party and basically brought it undone. Most cynical act of anyone I've ever seen in my life, but he's done it. And I thought it was an intelligent man. He is. He uses intelligence for extremely negative purposes. So that's one way of using your intelligence. And it's anyway. But that what the Labour have done and Liberals have done also, because they joined in with this, they inflated the price of energy, so double the price of power bills for many people. So people are paying a massive amount of money just to keep their lights on and keep their houses running, and keep the offices running, and keep hospitals running and schools running, which all pay their bills to private corporations who've lobbied the politicians to inflate the cost of energy, so the private corporations can make more and more money. And guess who cops the debt? The people cop the debt. They have to use their credit cards now just to get by, and government has to borrow a lot more money just to finance its services and its political promises. So in that way, it's like a pincer movement between left and right, who are working together. It looks like they're working in opposition to each other. The only opposition they have is if two shops sell a similar product, Woolworths and Coles, one will have a sale on this matter, another will have a sale on that matter, but the whole idea is to get you in the store and buy their product. That's about all it is selling a product. The profit being to the party and the corporate syndicates both parties work for, which happen to be exactly the same behind the scenes. You think the Labour Party borrows its money from anyone different from the Liberal Party, you have to be asleep or maybe too drunk to understand what's going on. But the fact is, between them, by inflating the cost of energy and then inflating rents are massively high for people, it means they've created a massive amount of struggle, especially for young people. And then they want to put a massive amount of HEX debt, or debt for their education, on them as well, on top of that, to imprison the young people into perpetual debt slaves. So we've basically gone back to, it's not actually slavery where the black people were slaved in the USA, or actually the Scottish people were enslaved in the mines, which they were, but it's a corporate slavery nonetheless, because you're still, unless you can overcome these debt problems that the government's created for you, you're really living in perpetual poverty, and basically you have been trapped, in other words, by pretentious policies that have been pretending to be for the people when they're not actually for the people at all. They're for the major corporate financial sector, the cabal, if you like, which the Saudis and the Islamic oil producers are all a part of. They're all part of this cabal, And they're doing it to try and make money so they can survive, 'cause it's all about a survival, and they want their regimes and their realms can survive and prosper. Well, that's what it's all about. It's a competition. It's an organic competition between different biological entities that all look sort of like humans, but they've got different cultures and customs, which means that then, because of their sovereign nature of their nations and their patriotism driven in that, and you back it up with religion, and you've got religious fervour that backs it as well, and then you've got a sort of a perpetual competition between humanity around different cultural identities and whatever. But that's basically, in a nutshell, what's really happening in the West, and why the West is defeating itself. And I get attacked all the time for saying, well, it's not really Muslim. If you're into a massive amount of debt and you're suffering because of the amount of debt you have, maybe it's your own fault that you created your own suffering. No Muslim has caused you to get in a massive amount of debt. No Muslim has caused you to forget your spirituality and get into materialism. No one has done that by itself. Maybe you'd be a lot happier if you hadn't got into a massive amount of debt, and maybe we'd be a lot happier if our power bills weren't so high, pretending we're trying to save the climate, which is all it's doing is causing suffering now by people who will say they're against suffering later. If they're against suffering later, why are you causing suffering now? Because you cannot stop the climate change by putting up the cost of electricity. That is irrelevant, and it's two separate issues, two separate mathematical and scientific issues altogether. Economics and the science of meteorology, or trying to do something about the weather, are two total separate issues. They've married and conned the people in the most greatest swindle on earth, perpetuated by two parties pretending to be separate but acting together in a pincer movement against the West for the banking cartels, where Saudis are part of, and the other parts, and there's other parts, all sorts of people within this banking cartels. The only thing they were interested in is gaining as much profit as they can, creating as much debt as they can, and having as many debt serfs or debt slaves, debt contracted into debts one way or other as they can. The more people have in debt, the more prisoners, the more fear they can have over the people, because debt is the biggest cause of fear of all. Because if you can't pay your debt, you lose your house, or you lose your car, or you lose your wife and kids, or all that sort of thing. You lose your status, you lose your ego, because of the amount of debt you've got. You then become a prisoner of political correctness, or the prisoner of the office, or the prisoner of the political system, or the prisoner of whether parochial entities that you've enjoined in to get yourself status and push your ego up, because you forgot the basic spiritual nature of human is made poorer by the greater amount of materialism it has. So you might be materially wealthy and spiritually poor, and in the end, will destroy the society, the fabric of society. Then someone will come in and say, as the kids get desperate 10-15 years from now, when AI and robots come in and start to decimate the workforce, someone's going to come in and say, well, we can save you. Become a Muslim. We'll forgive your debts, and we'll forgive your debts. You're going to become a Muslim, forgive your debts. It's only money. And they'll go, well, okay, yeah, all right, we'll buy that, because in the end, debt is the biggest fear. Debt is the way they've got everyone by the short and curlies. Debt is what's causing a massive fractiousness in society, having people to sit in traffic jams for 4 hours a day just to do a little job. And most of them are artificially created just to look like the economy's going boom. And half of them wouldn't have to be created anyway if they hadn't inflated the price of housing, price of electricity. A lot of women could be able to stay home and look after their children and nurture them and mother them and pass on that basic spirituality that motherhood provides to society, and that is the basics of civilization. And it is in that where the left is trying to destroy it, with all its political correctness, gender fluidity, whatever it's called, and they're trying to stop people identifying themselves as boys or girls, identified in motherhood, left are indeed a very dangerous force towards humanity. But I'm only the messenger. It's on an analysation of what has happened, because I've been very, very carefully monitoring it for a very long time. Whether you believe me or not, it really doesn't matter to me. That's entirely up to you. Do your own research. Never, ever, ever believe a media person who's getting paid to speak. Never believe a politician, ever. They're no longer meaning. They're meaningless people. Never believe a corporate entity. Only you have to believe maybe your grandparents who really care for the grandchildren, who maybe have come to wisdom, and then you have to then do your own research and understand what's really going on. Then maybe you can preserve your own genetic capital by passing on wisdom to your own offspring. And that is the art of survival, regardless what is ruling society. You must rule your own heart and your own mind. With individuals, each with an individual right, same as all others on this earth, to perpetuate our genetic capital forward.